Barrington Miller. I'm with the Canadian Securities Exchange, the CSE. It's not the Cannabis Stock Exchange or the or all the other acronyms. I'm just going to do a brief plug, but before I do, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. So we have Rob Kelly, Director of Investor Relations from Aurora, Scott Boys from MPX, CEO, and James Keogh from Sundial, CFO. So the Canadian Securities Exchange, we celebrated our 15-year anniversary. This year, we're home to well over 500 companies and 194 tradable securities in the cannabis and cannabis-related sector. So we have about 75 companies that are US-based or have US assets or interests. So we are very, very actively involved. Check out the show, #Finance. It's on your podcasts. You can listen to it on everywhere. But enough about us. Let's talk about some LPs. So yeah, let's go. Scott, tell us a little bit about what you do and what your company does.
We're a little bit different in that we sold our U.S. assets to Ianthus, or we merged with Ianthus in February of this year, and we were left with a Canadian asset, and we decided that we were going to focus on the international market. So our genesis is an international company that happens to have a Canadian asset with offices in London, Geneva, and Toronto.
James, tell us about Sundial.
Yeah, Sundial is a Canadian-based producer and distributor of cannabis. We segment our business into three core areas, what we call heal, help, and play. Heal being medical cannabis, help being over-the-counter health and wellness products, and then play being recreational cannabis. And we are grounded in recreational cannabis in Canada, but have expanded in the help segment in the UK. And Sundial differentiates itself by being a premium branded product globally, and
Rob, what about Aurora?
So Aurora Cannabis is probably the second largest LP in the world to date. We're primarily focused on both the medical markets in Canada and internationally, as well as the consumer market in Canada. I think to date we probably have the strongest brand recognition amongst Canadian consumers, and one of the largest patient bases as well.
Little known fact, Aurora got their start on the Canadian Securities Exchange, so I'm just giving a little plug there. Organic growth versus acquisitions. So we've seen a lot of companies that are starting to jump into markets that are starting to liberate with their cannabis mindset, and then we see other people that are waiting on the process of companies getting licenses and then merging or partnering with them. What are your thoughts on that, and how does that relate to you? Anybody? This is just an
I'll jump in. So clearly Aurora's been a very acquisitive company since our founding. I think one of our most important acquisitions we did in the European space was Pedanios in 2017. It's our European distributor. It provided us with immediate access to the German market. And from that, we've built a really strong team that's allowed us to be nimble and get into new jurisdictions in Europe. So recently we won the largest tender in Germany that just came out, 5 lots out of the 13, and as well we were able to win in Italy their tender to operate in that market for 2 years, essentially on our own. So there's a lot of value in being acquisitive and buying assets that allow you to get into a market quickly. But now that we're sort of reaching the maturity stage where we've built a strong enough team, we're able to use those in-house assets, and I think that the need to acquire is sort of going away.
James?
So Sundial is a newer producer. We really established ourselves in the play segment in Canada, and then lifted our head up and looked for other opportunities to expand globally. We also took an acquisition route, and we acquired the largest potted plant and edible herbs producer in the UK, and that established a platform for Sundial to move forward, focused on CBD.
Most of the world is an emerging market, so you're not going to find a lot of high-quality acquisition targets globally. So we've done a little bit of both. We acquired a small CBD company in Switzerland that we've now expanded significantly, and it's selling essentially what is a consumer CBD product into the UK, into Belgium, into Luxembourg. We grew about 170 acres of organic CBD flower this year, so that one will grow. But in places like the UK, like Australia, the Eurasian market, Africa, we're pretty well greenfielding our operations there.
This is for Aurora. Aside from Germany, which is the most established medical market for cannabis that you see in Europe and the best country for growth opportunities?
Sure. So Germany is obviously our biggest medical market outside of Canada today. We are developing and working with Italian regulators to build the market there. We recently entered the United Kingdom as well. Outside of that, there's some smaller markets that are starting to develop, but they're still fairly early stages. We're excited about the opportunity in France and Ireland. They're very close to bringing in a medical market themselves, and we are working with the regulators there to build that out. So I think probably Italy, UK, Luxembourg, and Poland are probably the biggest for us right now.
This is for Sundial. What is the current regulatory licensing environment in the UK?
Yeah, so I think licensing and regulation is going to be a key factor in any expansion program. This is legislation and regulations are evolving around the world. I think we have had the Canadian experience of being at the forefront of that. And I think what we're seeing in the UK is that we're probably sort of where Canada was 2 or 3 years ago in terms of the licensing and regulatory environment. Essentially in the UK, they break it down into 3 classes of licenses. First of all, there's an industrial hemp license, which Sundial possesses, which allows us to grow cannabis plants, but only to extract from stalks and seeds. So obviously that's a preliminary license. The second stage of licensing is a research and development license, allowing a company to extract from the whole plant and to test the extract from that whole plant. And then finally a commercial license, which will allow the production and distribution of cannabis and cannabis-derived products.
Scott, how important is vertical integration when it comes to building a global business, and how is it applying it in practice?
Well, I think you'll see, like most companies here in America or in Canada, you want to be able, and particularly if you look at Europe, it's essentially you've got a consumer market in the CBD market, and you've got a quasi-medical market on the THC side. And because it's quasi-medical, it's virtually pharma grade, you want to be able to control the quality of your product from seed to sale. So we think vertical integration is incredibly important, which is why we're building out GACP and GAP grow facilities in Africa, importing the product into Malta, where we acquired a GMP-ready facility, and from there we can produce products that we can sell within the EU entirely.
General question. Are you going to enter these markets as a local producer or an exporter from North America? Or both? What do you want to do?
I think for Aurora, we're going to do both. It's a balanced approach. We've got a pretty strong production footprint in Canada, 11 production facilities, 2 of which are EU GMP certified, and another 2 are likely to be certified within the next 60 days, which will bring our output capacity, our export capacity to Europe to about 50,000 kilos a year. We're also building facilities in Europe, 2 in Denmark and 1 facility in Germany. So the idea is really, as the demand in that area grows, we'll look to scale up our operations there, but for the time being it makes sense to be a Canadian producer and export to those markets.
And Sundial is also going to take an approach where we will be both. With the new production facility that we've acquired in the UK, we have 1.5 million square feet of greenhouse space there, and another 1 million that is under construction. So we will be producing product for export in the UK and to Europe and around the world that will offset our Canadian production capacity.
So we have a very small Canadian asset. So while it will be EU GMP approved, hopefully later this year, we could probably sell the product in Canada 2 or 3 times. So exporting to Europe is not our main focus. We plan on growing in South Africa and elsewhere, importing it into Malta, and being essentially a European producer for the European market.
Let's talk about first mover advantage. Do you want to expand on that? Into new markets, what's MPX's approach? Do you think that there is one?
Yeah, of course. I mean, these countries are going through the same type of evolution that we did here in North America. They start out with a very stringent medical program. The medical program expires and gets a little more flexible, and then they go into an adult use program later on. Switzerland and New Zealand, they're all on the edge of going adult use, so that's evolving. So getting first mover advantages, ask Bruce Litton what first mover advantage is like, or ask Aurora what first mover advantage is like. So we're working on several fronts on 3 continents to try and establish ourselves as one of the early movers in these markets.
This is for Sundial. Can you compare or contrast the facilities that you have in North America versus the ones you have in the UK?
Yeah, certainly. And I guess I go back to what I was speaking about earlier about Heal, Help, and Play. In Canada, where we're really addressing the recreational cannabis market, for us it's about producing the highest quality cannabis, premium cannabis that's grown in fully controlled, modular, purpose-built indoor grow rooms. And indoor grow rooms, I think, are generally accepted as producing the highest quality product. And we have complete control of the environment, of temperature, humidity, lighting, fertilization, water, every aspect, and plants that don't have to worry about cloudy days or the sun moving across the sky. I think all of these things have an impact on. Craft at scale is the way we describe it, that we produce in these small 3,000 square foot rooms. We right now have 114 of those rooms, either in production or awaiting licensing. And we have, through that method, had over 250 harvests already in 2019, which is a great learning opportunity for us because the harvests are so individualized and allow us to adjust all the inputs. So really, the premium quality is what our objective is in Canada. In the UK, where we are really trying to address the CBD market, which we believe is going to lead the full THC market by several years. And the extracted CBD is a less differentiated product than the flower that we're producing in Canada. So it's all about low-cost production there. And the most important, most significant inputs into the growth of cannabis is clearly power and labor. And with the Bridge Farm acquisition, it's a business that's been operating in a in a low-margin environment, producing potted plants and edible herbs, and have become very optimized and have through automation and mechanization. And secondly, so that has reduced the human resources inputs. And then secondly, in terms of the power inputs, we have made an arrangement with the UK government for a green energy subsidy. So we produce heat from biomass boilers that effectively means that that power cost is reduced to nil. So it's the difference between premium quality and low-cost production.
So yesterday we had a federal election in Canada. A lot of the Americans didn't know about it. They thought that was cute. So we've also celebrated the 1-year anniversary of legalization. What can jurisdictions take away from what played out over the past year in their process of legalizing or moving forward that you see?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think the biggest thing in Canada's market, the requirement to have a strong retail footprint is very clear 1 year in, right? So Ontario, we have 24 stores at the moment. It's the most populous province in Canada. You compare that with markets like Alberta, where they have, I believe it's almost 300 stores registered now. So the importance of having a strong retail footprint is really what we learned.
Ontario has 25,
Yeah.
Alberta has 300.
Yeah,
we got it wrong.
It's crazy, yeah.
I think you'll find that a lot of the world is coming to Canada to learn what we did right and to learn what we did wrong. We had a group of UK MPs into Toronto earlier this year, and we waltzed them around, and they saw dispensaries and they saw grows, and they've gone back to the UK, and they're working, each party is working on a white paper to present to their party on how to introduce medical cannabis more broadly into the United Kingdom, and recreational cannabis as well. We were with the Thai government the other day. They've had an entourage that's gone through the country. So they've come to learn what we did right, and I think our medical program was done very well. I think our dispensary rollout program hasn't done quite so well, but most of these countries are focused on the medical market anyway. So the mistakes we made in the recreational market, they'll learn from eventually. But right now they're kind of copying our medical model, and it's worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah, and I think for the most part that it's gone pretty well. I think Canada's been a good role model, and you know, being a leader in this, and that's why all these other jurisdictions are interested in learning from the Canadian experience. I think there was a lot of doomsday scenarios as we went to legalization just over a year ago that certainly have not played out, and I think the go low and or start low and go slow philosophy applies to the rollout in Canada, and I think has been a success. I mean, obviously there's been supply problems. There is still a lot of work to be done on the retail channels, as we talked about, but the introduction now of the phase 2 products, I think that measured approach to it has served Canada very well.
Has your shareholder profile changed? Do they look different? Do they act different? Do they trade different from say the UK versus Europe versus North America? Is there any change? Have you noticed?
I'll take that one first. I mean, the original company, Antecedent Company, most of our shareholders actually are the largest investors came from Europe. When we were trying to raise money in Toronto, they were too busy funding Aurora and Canopy and everybody else. They didn't want to give us any money to start in the U.S. And we went to U.S. funders. Of course, they were afraid of the federal illegality. So we went to London and raised our capital. And if you can walk around 3 blocks of Central Mayfair and you can run into virtually every family office in the world. So we raised our capital there. It was a little bit surprising for us to learn yesterday, we got a new NOBO list, that we have 17,000 U.S. shareholders. So that did surprise me, but still the largest holders are Australian, Hong Kong, the UK, Paris, Monte Carlo, so forth.
Sundial is a relative newcomer to public markets. We did our IPO in August this year. We worked with Jay, the previous panelist, on floating that IPO in August. And but we definitely had the opportunity to access UK capital markets. And I think one observation certainly is that people like to invest in their own backyard. Having a facility that's an hour away from London, where investors could take a short train ride, go out and actually see and observe and touch and feel and smell. I think that all of those things were very appealing and did help us to attract UK investors into our IPO.
So from Aurora's standpoint, I think the best way I look at it is that if I was to look at where we are today versus where we were last year, in around August of 2018, we were sitting at about 4% institutional ownership. Today, we're closer to about 14%. And then anecdotally, sort of looking at how when we go on the road in terms of the support we see from institutional investors, our CFO, Glenn, was just in the UK for an insurance meeting. We built a day around it in about half an hour. So there's definitely a lot of interest, and we're pleased to see it.
Well, at the CSE, we've noticed that there's a direct correlation to where your shareholders are based and your trading. So if you have 60% of your shareholder base in the United States, 60% of the trading is going to occur from U.S. shareholders. Are there any final thoughts before we close out this panel? Something you want the audience to know?
Well, I think I'll just add that as much, we seem to have flatlined a little bit in Canada, and the U.S. opportunity is still emerging and is still very exciting. The real future of this industry is going to emerge as a global market. I mean, they're estimating that Europe is a $125 billion market, which is larger than Canada and the U.S. combined. And then if you look at the global market, Prohibition Partners is talking about being a $1 trillion market. So the real opportunities not just exist in America or in Canada, but globally, and we're seeing that emerge all around the world now.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think the global opportunity is enormous, and I think we tend to talk about 2 cannabinoids and on a regular basis, and maybe a couple of more beyond that. We all know that there's more than 100 in total. I think that there's an enormous future in accessing all of those possibilities.
I think you guys captured it well. I think from our standpoint, in terms of comparing Aurora to our peers, at this point we've We haven't announced a lot of the big things that our peers already have, so we do have our U.S. entry strategy on the table. We are working and talking to partners today and in discussions, so there's still a lot of important inflection points that are coming up for the company, and we're excited about those.
And on that note, I love this industry. I get more hugs than handshakes, and it's a reflection of how much it unites every single person, globally, locally, and everywhere. So on that note, I'd like a big round of applause for our panelists, please.
Feel